And yeah, no, I just also thank you to Vladan for that talk and for ending it on a note. I'm talking about, decentralized AI futures, but I think I'm exploring a much more ambiguous territory. And I think one of the questions that I ask myself in my practice a lot is if the global south or more marginalized communities are more impactful or dangerous using this technology or just refusing it. And of course, I think everyone has the right and should have the right to refuse this technology. But I think there are some tactical questions and ambiguities around it that I am currently exploring. So the theme of this exhibition, or rather this panel discussion, has to do with the weaponization of consumer technologies and the weird membrane or revolving door between what is a consumer product and what is a military technology. I thought back to my college days. Actually, maybe I'm aging myself a bit here, but a film by Harun Farouki, Indistinguishable Fire, which was looking at the violence of napalm, not by looking at the impact on skin or tree canopies, but actually really exploring the mundane aspects of its production. And in this scene, which is comically exaggerated, this worker or possibly student is also saying this vacuum cleaner can function like a gun for some people, and for some other people it's a vacuum cleaner. So I think this question of, like who is it a gun for, when is it a vacuum cleaner, and if it's a gun, who is it being pointed at? I think these are central questions that Vladan was also talking about in terms of who owns the tools of production, who are the beneficiaries, and who is being harmed by these technologies. So it's clear that when it comes to dominant AI, which can be defined as large-scale automation projects by big tech companies, there is a clear dual-use agenda with governments participating in the AI race and most AI companies needing to compete for defense contracts to stay profitable. And AI, or data is the new oil, and AI is very much a smokescreen or a ruse for just hoovering more data from people. So I think there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of unstable narratives around AI. That's almost, schizophrenic. It's a threat because of AGI, it's a threat because of its militarization, but it's also this miraculous cure and so on. I think tech elites control this narrative because they feel that they are the guardians or brokers of these outcomes. Like you might get a doomsday narrative, or you could get a utopia depending on where you sit on the AI divide. So ultimately, this all points towards a kind of tech-enabled apartheid state. So yeah, I have some images up here, which I always continue kind of to go back to in terms of thinking about how the digital divide is weaponized. In Gaza, which Israel controls Palestinian technological capabilities, as well as cell phone towers. Gaza was on 2G before the genocide even started. So in that context, what is innovation? You see these scenes of people building these cell phone towers in order to stay connected to the world and stay connected to internet and so on, and just using incredible amount of perseverance and innovation in order to achieve this. And on the other hand, on the other side of the AI divide, NVIDIA is building Israel's supercomputer with I don't know how many chips that's going to be able to process even more reams and reams of data, a lot of which will be used for surveillance and militarization. So I think when as technologists or artists, and we talk about what is innovation, where do we? It really depends on where you orient yourself in terms of this tech divide. And also, there's been so much. Israel has been so invested in technocide of Palestinian technologies, controlling hardware, controlling software. There's also a reason that we are all, that they're investing so much in not having these capabilities. So before we fully approach or want to maybe embrace an abolitionist approach, we should also weigh what are the impacts of really not being able to participate or play in this field at all. So let's see. So yeah, but I mean, I also spent some time thinking about like what is decolonial AI? Is this even like a question that can be asked in terms of is it even possible given the scale of the imperial infrastructure, as Vladan has pointed out, and the kind of like hyper object and so. But I think it has to be grounded in real. If you're going to ask a question like that, it has to be grounded in real. Like imperatives, like can we use this in a not just human-centered way, but in a human rights-centered way? Can we build alternatives to mass infrastructure projects like supercomputers? Decentralized, localized computing. Can this actually exist? So these are some of the questions, I think, when trying to figure out or explore this ambiguity of should we abolish this technology, should we refuse it, should we participate, should we build an alternative system that, where the demilitarization of it and its decentralization would be necessary. So there are some areas that I think that these technologies can be used, or I have been looking at in ways that are maybe tactical, decolonial, good, I'm not sure. This bundle of technology that we call AI, which also includes, machine learning and retrieval systems and so on. But I think one area that is interesting is its use in reimagining archival structures. So, centralization has always been such a huge part of the colonial archive. And it's been a fundamental movement. So looted indigenous artifacts get housed in imperial capitals, and then they're subjected to regimes of custodianship, categorization, standardization, and so on. And digital architectures extend these kinds of archiving practices into databases, codes, platforms that now make up dominant AI systems. So there are some projects that I'm just going to briefly go through that I think are using this technology in ways that are using it to decentralize, to decolonize, and to complicate this idea of the archive as this central repository. And I think there are some technical capabilities that technology affords that will can kind of reorganize the spatial organization of the colonial archive and its kind of mirroring into digital infrastructures and databases. So some projects that I have looked at that I think are interesting is, for example, local context. They're using traditional knowledge and biocultural labels with Maori communities to essentially give provenance and permission to data. So you can't actually access certain kinds of cultural data unless it's been through a governance protocol. And it's permissioned by members of the community, let's say, to be given to only certain people or at certain times of year and so on. And this becomes kind of like baked into how the data circulates and how the data maintains an embodied relationship to the communities that produce this data. And I think using AI in this context, in creating these kinds of labels and these governance systems, is interesting. Another project that is interesting is a project called ICON. So they're using machine vision and multimodal analysis to identify forms of image violence in colonial archives from French and British history. So what they do is they link this machine vision multimodal capability to actual testimonies from those communities as well as to post-colonial scholars. So if you are just like searching this database, you no longer just see a single like uncritical image. You have this marginalia or these annotations that link this data directly to the testimonies of communities and such who were impacted by this violence. So, this has, could have a lot of implications in the way that libraries or digital archiving systems work. And then, I had another project Another generative AI project that I'll just briefly talk about is Mini Atairu's Igun AI, which was exploring the Benin bronze production in Nigeria after Britain's 1987 invasion. That whole tradition came to a halt. People were not able to continue to produce these amazing bronze sculptures, many of which now exist in colonial museums and archives. So what she did was she used generative methods and StyleGAN to explore what might have happened in this tradition in those years where this kind of colonial wound happened. And she uses fictioning methods, but they're anchored in archival practices. I think this kind of reparative, decolonial work using technologies like this, again, it's interesting. It addresses the gaps or the erasures in the colonial archive and record, and sort of complicates things. So let me just go back here. I might be missing. Yeah, so in my work, which you won't see today, but one thing I'm doing with another researcher is to create an archive that is of documenting the weaponization of Gen AI in the context of the Gaza genocide. We have hundreds and hundreds of images that we have we didn't use scrapers or anything. We actually went in and we've been kind of watching the space for some time. So the idea is that if we start to put new metadata around this, we start to categorize these kinds of harms. We denormalize them. There is an incredible amount of image violence, particularly anti-Palestinian image violence, but also, the right wing is using these technologies in Europe and in the US as well. And they're playing on the inherent racism in a lot of these models, which is data-based, but there's also a lot of engineers that come in and do a lot of alignment work. So, for example, this image of this girl, generated in Midjourney, and it's not just, data logical violence, because there's clear directives like you never show a tank, you never show the IDF in a negative light, and it's just this infinite nakba that is synthetic and just goes on forever, So I think these are actually also testaments or documents of just the death of our imagination as a species. I don't know what to say, but it's a kind of future side. We can't imagine the future, and these technologies are enabling certain groups of people to subject their idea of the future on the world, and the data and the alignment and the black box and all is supporting that. But if we're not careful, actually, in the case of this image of which was put out by the Israel's Prime Minister's Office of Gaza 2035, it's actually removing people's agency for even imagining their own future. So I think future side is real, technocide is also real, So lastly, for the I won't talk too much about it because you can come and you can see the work, but with Tatri's Garden, which I trained on, it's a bunch of small models trained on Palestinian embroidery combined with plants that are important to ecology and diet. The idea is that this connection to the homeland and to land continues into this advanced technology, but it's also what does this technology mean now if it's in service of at-risk heritages or archives that are, being erased by marginalized groups? Does it fundamentally change if the use cases are, articulated very differently? And yeah, I also agree with Vlad. And the thing with, AI was that it was really developed without a use case. It was just developed to do everything, and that's what AGI supposedly is going to do. But I think if there's one area where we can have some agency and we can keep kind of banging our heads if we're going to use this technology is to really, really define the use case and define the community and force this technology in a way to be in service of certain groups of people and certain types of situations. And then we will see if the nature, like the ontological nature, whatever this technology shifts, if you shift the use case significantly. So in short, dominant AI, it's weaponizing the digital divide, it's deepening it, it's complicit in growing apartheid, militarization, labor exploitation, data extraction, and art theft as well. It's clearly a weapon, we know this, it's not just a vacuum cleaner. And I think, the question is whether or not we need a weapon to counter a weapon, or, if we should just, I think there's a lot of ambiguity and there's a lot of thought that needs to be done in kind of weighing out the consequences of, an abolitionist approach or the consequences of, participating in some way, or maybe both is necessary if you're going to be more tactical about it. But I think any decolonial framework has to be against universalist computing in any way, and it has to start with being very, very localized, serving very specific communities, use cases, and having the whole data logical structure of how data circulates, be embodied and be grounded and be, owned by completely different governance systems. And, who knows then what this technology would mean, but, it's highly speculative and it's ambiguous, and that's kind of where we are now, or where I am with my practice. So that's it.